Nutritional psychiatry is really simple. Before you give a talk, you insist they serve pizza and beer. And so it's just an honor to be here with you all. When I think, I was joking with someone that in my mind this was a culinary medicine conference I'd signed up to speak at, and I was going through Instagram, I don't know, late one night, looking for my self-esteem, and I saw this Farm Food and Health. I was like, what's this conference? I want to come to this conference, and I start clicking, and it's like, dude, you are going to that conference. Calm down. Go to sleep. So here we are. What a nice room to be in, filled with people who care about what's most important to me, which is about our food and about how it connects to our health and how that connects to our communities. And I'm very thankful to all of the organizations who've brought me here. And I like Traverse City a lot. You've got a really special town. And so thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here with you. Especially because I want to talk to you about not just your health, but your mental health. And we so often, when we think about our food supply and we think about foods, we connect that to our heart health, to cancer risk, to important things, diabetes. But if we think about from and we'll go over some of the data, from a disability standpoint, and I guess also from a personal standpoint in terms of our communities and what matters to us in terms of how we feel day to day, mental health really needs to be at the very center of our conversation when it comes to food, because nothing creates mental health like a good food system. So I want to share with you some of the most recent data from what's being called Nutritional Psychiatry, which is combining our medical study of mental health with nutrition. And I'll tell you a little bit about my history. It's really fun to follow two real pioneers in the field who have done such great work. And it's nice to follow this history of how farming has changed. Because I want to talk a little bit about how that has then led to changes in nutrition related to our mental health. And then of course to talk about the wonderful concept, very important concept, that it's not just growing food and it's getting access to that food. When you look at the food insecurity data and how it relates to mental health, the risk of depression in the elderly goes up by 10 times when you add in food insecurity. Right? And so where's that in our mental health system, right? Thinking, and you can say, well, it's here in Michigan, you're building it. And you see those numbers, right? You watch that video, and it just, in some ways, I think more powerfully demonstrates than any of the data that I'm going to show you what happens when we give families, especially families with kids, access to healthy food and produce that's grown in their local communities. There's just, there's no medicine like that. So I want to talk to you about the evidence and then also the application of sort of how we do this thing. I'm a shrink in New York. I've got a couch, and people might wonder, how do you slide the kale salad in there? Great, yeah, your mom, she was a problem, and you have a lot of issues, and you should eat more vegetables. How do you fit that in? You should listen to what I say with some skepticism. I'm a diet book author, and so I really ask people to be very skeptical. I'm going to present data to you, but I meet a lot of people who've been under the influence of diet book authors, and they have a lot of strange thoughts about food. And so I want to be clear that the guiding principle that I think is most important for you and your food is that you enjoy it, that you are a joyful eater, and that you enjoy as much and as deep the experience of your food. I do some work for Medscape, mainly trying to promote the idea of holistic and integrative nutrition in my field. I'm not going to talk about any off-use labels of any medications. I'm going to talk about a lot of off-use label of dark chocolate, and so don't get me in trouble. What I really want to do is have you appreciate the connection between this new evidence looking at food and mental health. It's come along over the last 15 years, and it's very exciting, especially when you think, when do people get to see me? When it's bad, because honestly, when do you say maybe you should talk to a professional psychiatrist or something? That's not the beginning intervention usually. It's late in the game, and it leads to this great question for those of us who have mental health issues in our family, which that's all of us in this room, right? Let's just be real honest, or us ourselves, right? What do we do? What is there to do before you get asked to come in and talk to me? And it's a nice conversation when you come to talk to me. It's a lot, it's not as scary as people think. And then I want to help you integrate some key concepts. You all are very special brains. You're the brains that are driving food change in Middle America. And to me, there's no more important brain to make sure is well nourished than your brains. When I think about the just buzz in this room and the excitement and the synergy, I want to make sure you leave here with the basic understandings of how to keep your brains healthy. It's not that complicated. I bet you're doing it mostly, but I think there's that intention for all of us. When we see the data and the data lines up with our intention and the intention lines up with our plate, I think something transformative happens when those choices are informed by good science. Oh, and then neuroplasticity, I just don't want to leave the beginning without mentioning that word. We're going to talk about how your brain is growing. Now, just people ask how I got into this, and to follow the speakers, I was a young physician, and this is where I came from. And I was in New York City at Columbia. I was 26. I was a vegetarian. I'd gone to medical school at IU. I was supposed to be the doctor of the future, class of 2000, and doctors for a new century. When Dr. Rivard was first in practice in 79, I was 4. And we didn't know that in 2000, that your brain continued to grow, that you form new brain cells and new brain connections. We kind of got told, like, you've got a lot of brain cells. Good luck with those. I hope they don't run out and you don't make any more. Off you go. And that was scary, right? And so it was very exciting when we began to learn that you actually give birth to new brain cells, and that if you take care of your brain in certain ways, again, ways I think many of you already do, you can have a bigger, stronger, healthier, more resilient brain. So back to the farm. This is our front field in southern Indiana, where you learn interpretations to tell you New Yorkers, like, well, you should make hay when the sun shines, right? And they look at you like, what are you talking about? But this really has come to inform my practice. And then a couple of years ago, I was in that strange state of middle age where things are going well and you're living in New York and you've spent more on preschool than you did on your medical degree, and you just think, like, that's not right at all. And so you move back to the farm with your parents. Like, that's the height of, yeah. So that's what we did. If you want to call my analyst, you can. I was like a little disappointed. And that's led to all kinds of interesting things. Like, remember when dairy started getting a bad rap? Well, part of growing up on a farm and being interested in farms and being a doctor is when those kind of things happen, it's like you can't just go to the journals. You got to be like, we should lease some lactating goats. And my wife's wonderful. She thought that was a great idea. And so Missy and Clover, well, we brought them home from the county fair, a great deal. We leased them for 2 months, and suddenly we had ruminants on our farm. And it was the first time we'd ever had ruminants on your farm. And when you have pasture, there's really not much else you can do with it besides like worry and make hay. And suddenly there it was getting turned into goat's milk every morning. And it was just wonderful. The other thing is our son was trying to get off the boob in terms of, he liked breastfeeding, and I thought it was great. And the analyst said, my psychoanalyst wondered about that. He's like, you're doing what? And I was like, well, it's like he's a transitional object. So we woke up every morning and we'd meet these goats. And those of you who are farmers know there's just some way that you get pulled into a different time. Right? You get pulled into, like, you wake up at 7 a.m., 6 a.m., you got something to do. And you come over the hill and the goats are like up with like one hand on the fence, like, you guys overslept again? You can tell by the way I'm leaking. And then it's led to these other moments that, gosh, I don't know whether they happen so much anymore, where you get your kids and your parents all mashed together in a garden, and it's just a beautiful thing. I don't really think this is part of many people's mental health plans, but it certainly became part of my mental health plan. And mental health is important. I know I'm supposed to be talking to you about mental health, but there is no health without mental health. Mental health are our most costly set of conditions because they hit us early. Right? Heart disease, cancer, these are horrible illnesses, but they tend to get people later in life. Our most productive years are teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s, right? When we're developing our skills, developing our sense of identity. And that's when mental health conditions hit. That's why they're the largest cause of disability worldwide. 2020, depression will be the largest cause of disability in America. And so anything we can do in this fight against mental health, against mental illness, and about things like depression, I think is something that we have to pay very close attention to in our healthcare system. Otherwise, we're kind of bailing against the tide on the treatment side. We often do this in dollars, right? Dollars, how much it costs. And it's like, I don't know, you sit with one family that's lost a member to suicide, there's no cost in that. There's no recovery from that in a certain way. I mean, it's just awful. It doesn't take, very, very much of that to desperately want better solutions. This statistic, I just hate. And I don't hate very much. I'm a pretty loving person, but I don't like the statistic anymore because I think it just drives stigma. It means those people over there, the 20% with mental illness, not me. And I just don't think that's true about any of us. It's why I want to focus on our mental health. Because that's one thing, irrelevant of whatever diagnosis or genetic vulnerabilities or life experience that you've had, you have mental health concerns. You have a mental health just like your physical health that you can improve. Right? I mean, if I want to look good on the Traverse City beaches this next summer, this summer is a little late for me, right? You've got some ideas for me, some crunches, some bicep curls, right? How to look good and get my physique in shape for the beach. But what about my mental health? What can we all do to improve our mental health? Besides, like, go to talk therapy or wait until that time when you really need help with your mental health because you're struggling. And when we focus on all of us having mental health we can improve, it shifts the conversation because it's a conversation we're all having. And it doesn't start with depression or addiction or suicide. It starts with today. It starts with tomorrow morning, looking people in the eye and just being a little bit more connected. As I said, people don't get to me. 59% of people don't get any treatment for these are diagnosed mental health concerns. That pops up to 80% if you're a man. 50% of our kids have no mental health treatment at all. Again, these are the most disabling illnesses. They're dangerous. We have a lot of stigma and fear around them because we don't know exactly what they are. And because of that, we don't engage with very effective treatments. You come and see me and you're depressed or anxious, I'm not going to guarantee it, but I'm going to pretty much guarantee it. I will guarantee one thing. You'll have a partner in that fight. And I'm pretty sure you're going to get better. But I don't think that's the experience most people have when they begin to have mental health concerns. And so to bring the conversation of food, this is a picture of my wife's arm. We're doing a little CrossFit. And the question is, by eating these foods, can we build a better, more resilient brain, a stronger brain, a brain that maybe brings a little bit more into the fight against something like depression or anxiety or PTSD or addiction? After all, think about what I do. I meet with lots of young folks. They're in their teens. They're living in their basement, maybe doing some strange things. They're depressed. They're lost. Everyone's asking them, what's your passion, bro? And they don't know. And going into that fight, whatever we might need to do, I want to make sure that their brain is really, really strong and resilient. But that's not what we're getting most of the time. And what makes the brain strong and resilient? Well, we have this saying in biology, right? Structure equals function. When you look at something under the microscope or a scanning electron microscope, you see its structure, you get a sense of its function. So what's the structure of your human brain? I'm going to talk about it, I'll show you in a minute, but it's a structure of connection. And to me, that's sort of like the most powerful lesson that we have about brain health, which is that our brains are there to connect us. They're there to connect us with our own sense of purpose. Our brains are here to connect us with each other. And our brains are here to help us connect to our communities. And this idea of brain growth is such a wonderful one because it means that wherever we are right now, wherever you are in your mental health, right, there's the possibility, there's this capacity that your brain has to grow and learn and move in whatever direction you and your purpose need it to. What controls that is a neurotrophic factor. That's a fancy science word for just meaning this is something you pour on brain cells, and the brain cells are like, you want to hold hands? Brain cells, I'll show you them in a few minutes, are little like 8th graders at a dance. They reach out and they don't quite touch. We focus, that's like old, right? That's like 6th graders, I should say now. We focus on so many other organs when it comes to our food. And it's kind of weird because what eats the majority of your calories? Not the majority, but more than any other organ is your brain. 20%, a fifth of everything that you eat fuels your brain. And it's just like 2.5 pounds. Everybody's got about the same size brain and it is hungry. It doesn't stop burning calories when you sleep. It doesn't burn more calories when you're doing the SAT versus not. It's just always chugging along. It is 60% fat. Patients are really surprised to learn this. In this whole anti-fat movement, we lost the perspective that the most incredible thing in the human universe, the human brain, is made of fat. Big deposit of fat and cholesterol, basically. And I like to put cholesterol up there because we focus so much on how this is the worst molecule in the world, but then we forget everybody likes sex, right? Where does sex hormones come from? Cholesterol. Everybody likes vitamin D, right? Where do vitamin D comes from? Cholesterol. Every cell in your body has cholesterol in it. Dietary cholesterol, if eaten in small amounts or appropriately, it's not so clear how much that correlates with heart disease. But this has become the focus of food advice in medicine. Food as medicine became don't eat meat or cholesterol or eggs. And I think we can do better than that. We changed the food supply so much. The last 100 years, we've changed the food supply more than we ever have, more than probably 100,000 years. And that whole notion of like eat what grandma ate, that probably doesn't apply anymore. Grandma was eating processed food. We went from whole foods to processed foods, and what does that really mean? Well, it means we began to trust that people who had an idea of what was healthy for us and could kind of put things together in a cheap way that stayed on the shelf, that they knew what was right for our health. And that's just not turned out to be true, has it? The more that we've adulterated and interfered with our food, really the worse our health has gotten, and just kind of clear and obvious correlation. We stopped eating animals, and there's been this big move away from animals as opposed to really taking a step back and thinking what's happened. That as we've eaten more processed food and we've eaten lower quality meats, we really are eating in a way that we never have before in human history. It's not just the meat problem. Meat has always been a food that humans have eaten, but it's the way that our food supply has come to structure that relationship. And in doing that, we've really shifted our fats. The most important fat in your brain is DHA. It's a long-chain, 22-carbon-long fat. You only find it in a couple places. Fatty seafood, mainly. It's bioconcentrated in algae. But as we've switched over to grain feeding and CAFOs, we've really begun to move our meat to almost entirely omega-6 fats, which are a little more pro-inflammatory. It's just a radical shift. And then we put all this new stuff in food dyes and preservatives, trans fats. I remember when Mayor Bloomberg in New York banned trans fats, and I was like, where do those trans fats come from, those nasty things? And I'll show you where they come from. We made them. But before I tell you about trans fats, we of course have to talk about pizza, right? So you guys know who this is? It's the father of pizza. It's true. I mean, it's really shocking to me. As I began to learn about the food supply, I was really struck because I like Italian food a lot. And to me, Italian food means pizza and pasta with red sauce. So it's really disorienting when you learn that the Italians only got tomatoes 400 years ago. And I've been wondering, like, well, what was Italian food back then? Christopher Columbus came back with some great stuff for his mistress. You know what he bought? He brought a corn flower, rare corn flower. It's a beautiful grass corn. They found it in the New World. It was very easy to grow, very nutritious, delicious. Who doesn't like corn? They brought corn back to the old world. But Christopher Columbus forgot something. He forgot something that all cultures that have survived on corn throughout history have known, is that you've got to soak the corn in lime overnight. And if you don't, you have some problems. Now, he didn't know this. He kept exploring. He left. But, about 40, 50 years ago, after he dropped off the corn, there started to be these, strange reports of these, very scary people who only came out at night. You've heard about them, maybe. When the sun would hit their skin, they'd moan and scratch, and they'd blood dripping down the corners of their mouth. And they didn't make a lot of sense, and they'd get agitated and scream at you and chase you and then try and bite your neck and suck your blood. So the problem was, if you don't mix the corn with the lime, you end up with pellagra. Pellagra is the 4 Ds. It gives you a dermatitis, that's the thick skin. It gives you diarrhea, one of the reasons you're so grumpy and agitated, on top of the fact you're a little bit demented, and then eventually you die. But it's not because there are vampires everywhere. It's simply because Christopher Columbus forgot to bring the lime with the corn. And I guess it's just a simple story to illustrate how we tend to explain things in all kinds of complicated ways when there's a nutritional issue that we can't quite conceive of or understand. The other thing, besides sort of missing out on the culture of our food and kind of honoring our ancestors and what we've always eaten, is that we started making food in the early 1900s. It was a great reference to sort of Pasteur and this idea that, it's sort of weird now. We'll end talking about probiotics like I want to give you bacteria, whereas as a physician for all of history, we just wanted to kill bacteria. But this sterile sort of idea of food came around in the early 1900s, and then in 1912, this guy, Edwin Kaiser, a German biochemist, came across from Germany with this little tiny vial in his pocket that would end up killing millions of Americans. Harvard estimates about 200,000 heart attacks a year come from trans fats. What he figured out is if you heat up cottonseed oil and hydrogenate it, you make this stuff that looks kind of like lard. So we should probably eat it. And it was cleaner than lard. Back then, candles were made of pork lard. That stank, right? All your cooking was in pork lard. I like a little pork lard, but every now and then, not everything, right? Kitchen smelled like pork and animal fats. Yuck. So let's get this clean, delicious stuff. Because it's so good for you, right? Like doctors say it is. The bad news is you have cancer. The good news is Crisco is delicious. And then let's just reinvent Americana. This was the first food that really got pushed out and marketed. This whole clean world where you could have Crisco and no bacteria. Hundreds of women were trained and they wore perfect white uniforms. They went all across America with these stainless steel kitchens. And they showed you how to cook with Crisco so you could make things like shortcake. And it's better than that regular shortcake you were making with butter because it's delicious and doctors say it's good for you. It's not an animal fat. Well, what then happens is we begin to increasingly change how we think about food. We focus on heart disease. We get into arguments about whether we should eat butter or not eat butter, eat margarine or not eat margarine. We get in discussions about eggs and bacon, and we kind of miss the point. We missed the point that we just stopped eating food that came from farms. We've missed the point that we stopped living in harmony with our food. And we missed the point that as this happened, we began to really shift how the public thinks about nutrition. And instead of focusing on joyfulness, we focused on fear. When you're a physician like I am, you sit with people and they are scared. They're scared if they make the wrong choice or eat the wrong thing, that they're going to end up with one of these bad diseases. And that's just no way to live. And it's no way to eat. In 1941, the USDA issues the Basic 7, just trying to focus on these basic food categories, like eggs and cereal. And butter. I like the food category of butter, right? That's good. Because if you don't get butter, it's like, what's on your toast, right? Like, just jam. And then here, of course, it's very important to get at least 2 servings of fruit and 2 servings of vegetable, right? Other than a potato. That's vegetables, and that's the 1940s. And we really have been on a horrible tear since then, one that is very easy to change. It didn't help us, right? Over here, these are below the recommended daily allowance. We're not eating the things that we all kind of can, from a basic standpoint of what I want you to think about nutrient density, to stop thinking about calories, to stop worrying about cholesterol, and think about nutrient density. That's the bang for the buck of your food. It's how many nutrients do you get per calorie? And on top of that, sad news, this is old data. It's just gotten worse. I didn't want to get you too depressed here late at night. So 2009 data, and these are the percentage of the US population not meeting the recommended daily allowance. So it's not deficiency data. It just means like every day, 42% of it's actually over 50 now, 50% of Americans don't get enough zinc. And that's a huge problem, and I'll show you why in terms of what zinc does to your brain. Now, why is that? I mean, we all know sugar's on the rise, but I just think to understand when sugar occupies spots in your caloric intake, or a big place, you're getting absolutely nothing other than calories, right? You're getting no nutrients, nothing to burn that fuel. Your brain loves sugar. Your brain is made to burn glucose. Burn, burn, burn. But what do you do with all the waste that you create from burning that glucose? Well, that's where you depend on all of the nutrients. And we're not getting that, especially our kids, right? As soda went from 6 ounces to the big gulp, right? Look at the percent of sugar that begins to occupy the caloric intake of a child. These little old people are like, oh, they don't drink soda anymore. They drink juice. It's like, okay, turn over the juice. It's like math, right? Soda, 39 grams of carbohydrate. Like little box of juice, 60 grams of carbohydrates. Like same stuff, just sugar. Sugar and no nutrients. So sugar's become an issue, obviously. And we talk about sugar and how to eliminate that and the importance of eliminating processed food. It really comes back to when you look at this slide and how we're sort of missing things. That added sugars, added fats, and added sodium are really a signal of processed food. That's not because people are eating butter or like using the salt shaker. It's because people are eating things like burrito wraps that have 3/4 of your daily intake of sodium in them. So we think about how the human brain evolved and where it evolved. Everyone says it evolved in the grasslands of Africa. And that's sort of true, except they weren't grasslands. When you put anything mammalian out in a grassland, its body gets bigger and its brain gets smaller. And that's not what happened to us yet, right? What happened to us is our brains got a lot bigger. And that's because we were on a shoreline. This is what was going on back then with the human brain. The Rift Valley was a coastline. And if you go back there, you find these big, what are called middens, these deposits of shellfish, these deposits of bones from small fish, and mussels, clams, and oysters, their shells. You find actually those deposits all over coastlines, even around Manhattan, right? Because this is one of the basic foods that humans and humanoids have always eaten and began to eat, and likely drove our brain development. It's a great book called Survival of the Fattest by Stephen Kunane, and he argues that there's a select set of nutrients that our brain needs, some minerals like zinc and iron, and then these long-chain omega-3 fats that you only find in seafood. And there's all kinds of seafood, right? But this has probably looked a little bit like the diet that primitive people ate that helped our brains kind of increasingly organize. And it's amazing when you think about it, these are your brain cells. They're very specialized cells. I mean, they do stuff no other cells do, right? Like they make electricity, that's kind of cool. They make human consciousness, that's kind of cool. Nothing else does that, you know. I was talking to Dr. Fox, he's a cardiologist. I mean, it's a pump. It's awesome, but it's a pump, the heart, right? No offense, Dr. Fox. Consciousness, man, that's what I get to take care of. And when you look here, so as I said, the eighth grade, these are two eighth graders at a dance, right? So these are two brain cells trying to touch, but instead of touching, this is actually what my dad warned me about. He's like, don't put your pollen on the girls. I didn't know what he's talking about until I saw this. But what's fascinating is, so everything you're experiencing right now this is the process that underlies it. Think about every word that I'm forming, every articulation, that traveling across this little time-space continuum into your ears, right? That getting then translated into words. Like if I said, I don't know, Mesopotamia or elephant or anything like that, that is all comes down to billions of these little synapses. And what's getting floated across here, that's when we talk about things like serotonin and dopamine. They're getting floated across here on little lipid rafts that are made of omega-3 fats. It's just fascinating to think that that is happening hundreds, thousands of times a second as we understand our world. This is what it looks like if you have a video of it. I don't know how to play the video. I've never played a video in So I just want to know. I hit the play button, what do you think? No. This is what it looks like in the brain. I just want to show you, or not, we'll just keep going. And that was just like electrical stuff in there. It's like a video to just illustrate that point. But the bottom line is that beautiful biology underlies everything we do, what we feel. And I think it's really fun to connect what's going on right there at the synapse to your fork. To me, that's very powerful, and it's something that we don't do, that actually the meals that we eat contain the nutrients that we need, all of these, to make human consciousness. Right? To me, that's a more compelling reason to pick the right foods than, butter's bad for me, or because of something that's way on down the road. I like the idea that we can compel people to eat better through improving their mental health and all of the goodness that comes with that. Now, this has then begun to take a hold in my field a little bit more. This is a group article from the International Society of Nutrition and Psychiatry Research, which is an organization I got to be one of the founding members of, which super surprised me, but it was great. I remember being in my pickup truck in Indiana, and I'm on this conference call with Felice Jacka and like all of these great researchers. And I've been asking patients about food. I'd written a book about food and mental health, but there was a little bit of data. And it was so exciting that there's a movement afoot. It really started with the omega-3 fats. I was a young vegetarian doctor in New York, and I didn't eat any seafood. I came from Indiana, but I was a vegetarian, which meant like Snackwell cookies, veggie burgers, pasta, mac and cheese, and pizza. It's a Mediterranean vegetarian. I'm eating a lot of Italian food. And I started to hear and learn about the omega-3 fats. There's just really interesting data of how they're so connected to our brain health and it's a possible intervention. And I had that feeling of like, where do those come from? Same thing I had with the trans fats. And I was like, well, those are in seafood. And I was like, but I'm a farm boy from Indiana. Seafood means fish sticks in the cafeteria, and that's disgusting. And so I started learning to eat seafood. And this group statement was one of the first statements ever to think about nutritional medicine in psychiatry, and simply saying, hey, Dr. Fox thinks about food when he thinks about his cardiology patients, right? When our endocrinologists think about diabetes, they think about food, or at least have some recommendations. At the American Diabetic Association, American Cardiology, they have recommendations about food. There are no recommendations about food and mental health at this point, and that's time that changes. It should change because of our data. This is the first study ever published about food and mental health. It's a simple cross-sectional study. This isn't the strongest data. And it simply says that when you look at the dietary pattern of an individual, you find very strong correlations between the rate of depression and the rate of anxiety. Right? And what you find is these traditional dietary patterns, the Mediterranean diet, Japanese diet, Norwegian diet, correlate with a much lower risk of getting depressed versus our Western diet. This is a large prospective trial. So that last trial had about 1,000 patients, and it was just cross-sectional. It's the Whitney Houston of trials, One Moment in Time. This is a prospective trial, the Mediterranean diet. Is that Whitney, One Moment in Time? I think that's good. And the Mediterranean diet followed 10,000 university students, and it looked at how well they ate the Mediterranean diet. Followed them for 4.5 years. Really powerful trial because they also really controlled anybody who was on meds or got depressed in like the first 6 months of the trial. They got them out of the data set. And what they found is that over 4.5 years, the individuals who ate most closely to a Mediterranean diet, I mean, they just got a 5 on the Mediterranean diet score. That's not like amazing. That's like a fair amount of French fries probably. Well, these individuals had a decreased risk, right? Like 50% decreased risk of getting depressed, no matter how they ran the numbers. Now, if this data would hold up, wouldn't you just think it's like a basic thing we should all just, again, take a step back and do as quickly as possible, is try and change the food in college cafeterias? Because let's just say this is half right, 25% fewer cases of depression. I'll take it. I'll take that in a second. And especially when it's an intervention that has no side effects. It tastes good, and as we're talking about, it's good for our local food supply and food system. That to me feels, as my colleagues say, like win-win-win to me. But as you know, medicine is a complicated thing, right? I guess maybe I've been called a pioneer, but there's also a way I've been called Dr. Kale. Told I have kale mania because I care too much about leafy greens. So we need a randomized data. We need a good randomized controlled trial to show this. And in the last 3 years, there have been 4. This was the first one, the SMILES trial, looked at about 60 individuals and gave them 7 individual nutrition counseling sessions about adhering to the Mediterranean diet. What they found is about 1/3 of those individuals who were already in mental health treatment went into full remission. And the number needed to treat, which is an important number in medicine, is 4. I have to prescribe the Mediterranean diet to 4 patients who already have depression, we call this resistant depression, to get one of them into full remission. That doesn't sound like a great hit rate. Well, let's compare that to the atypical antipsychotic Abilify. That's crossed over from the schizophrenia market to the bipolar depression market into augmenting SSRIs in depression. You've probably seen ads on the TV. Abilify can be a really effective and great medication. It costs about $1,000 a month. It comes with a significant risk of metabolic disorder and tardive dyskinesia. And the number needed to treat is 10. Meaning I got to get that medicine to 10 patients to get one into full remission. Now, people say eating a lot costs a lot of money. Well, in the SMILES trial, the participants saved $140 a month. So to me, it just seems like something that, again, can easily slide into our mental health care system in a way that is powerful and in a way that also shifts how patients relate to us. You don't have to just come to me when you're suicidal and depressed or struggling in a really bad way. You can come to me when you need, like, I don't know, some new kale recipes or to be reminded about seafood or to have a conversation about how to improve your mental health. There's a way that in mental health we can be involved a little earlier. The SMILE study was followed up with the Healthy Med study, and this was a study that did a Mediterranean diet cooking workshop for 3 months. Now, that would get me not depressed. Like, what are you doing this week? It's like, I've been real depressed. I'm going to my Mediterranean style cooking class, hanging out with my other friends with depression. We're going to make some tapas. Like, that would be great. They found depression scores improved by 45% in the Mediterranean diet, right? So, and that maintained for 6 months. So again, just another powerful trial, small, bigger than the SMILES trial, but still small, showing that food and talking about food makes a difference for people with mental health conditions. And then it leads to this question, like, what is this magic special sauce of the Mediterranean diet? Like, why is it so good for us? And in some ways, when we contrast this, like, how did we change our diet, right? We didn't do this whole, like, plant-based or animal fats to, like, Crisco move. With the Mediterranean diet, they've just been drinking liquid gold for thousands of years. Olive oil, simple monounsaturated fat. Right? Their diet, if you look at any Mediterranean style platter, it's just stuffed with all kinds of colors and plants and phytonutrients. Right? Nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices are everywhere, and they eat a lot more seafood than we do anywhere in the Mediterranean. And I began to wonder, like, well, how do you apply this in clinical practice? Because I'm from Indiana. You tell people eat the Mediterranean diet, they're like, yeah, you know, I went to Fazoli's, I got the pasta buffet, I went to Pizza Hut, I got some pizza. Don't worry, doc, I ate some Greek food, I had a lamb hero. It's like, that's not the Mediterranean diet. And I wondered which foods, if we're gonna like tell people which foods from a mental health perspective you should eat, what did the data and the research say? Like my colleagues wanted to know, like, what is the scale of which you speak, Ramsey? Because it seems odd. And so Dr. LaChance and I, a great psychiatrist up at University of Toronto, asked this question. What does the data say? What nutrients are most related to depression? Looking at both the epidemiological evidence and randomized trials of individual nutrients. And we found that there are 12 nutrients that had significant data that they're very involved in the pathophysiology of depression. And then we just asked that nutrient density question. Bang for buck. What foods have the most of these nutrients per calorie? It was called a nutrient profiling system. If you shopped at Whole Foods, remember they had like that number, like kale got 1,000, everything else got like less. That was the aggregate nutrient density index. It's a nutrient profiling system. There are 26 of those in existence. This is the 27th. It was the first one ever to focus on brain health. And this is what we found. And when you look at this, what's really important about a nutrient profiling system, the people who kind of talk a lot about this research, they really emphasize that you focus on food categories, that you don't focus on individual foods. Like, don't tell the kale mafia I said this, but you don't ever have to eat kale, ever, as long as you're eating leafy greens, because these nutrients kind of travel in food categories. And when you look at the food categories that are represented up here, you see leafy greens, you see rainbow vegetables. Right? When you look at what's in these top animal foods, one of the, I'd say, sort of issues with most nutrient profiling systems is 98% of people eat meat and seafood, but they never rise to the top of nutrient profiling systems because they have more calories. But look up here in the top 5, mussels, clams, and oysters. Now, that's because those, and we'll talk a little bit about those, are so incredibly nutrient dense with these specific nutrients that your brain seems to thrive on. So I've ended at this stage of my career then of realizing you're talking a lot about nutrients with patients, right? You need more iron, you need more vitamin E, you need more magnesium. But that was really just supporting the supplement industry. Because when you tell patients that, they're like, great, which bottle should I buy? And I didn't really think that was a way to get your nutrients. In fact, I got really convinced and kind of convicted that could you actually build human health by just not taking any supplements or vitamins at all? Not that I have anything against that. Certain people certainly need them. But there's been such a push in the wellness movement that there's something about you that's broken. And you need like some supplements. And often that message is from the people who are selling the supplements. And as an Indiana farm boy, that begins to bother me a little bit. And so I wondered, how could we take this data and just translate it into foods and then give it to people? So we created an e-course, Eat to Beat Depression, and then some pretty materials to go with it. And also I realized the way that you get into people's kitchens is by making little handouts they can put on their fridge. And I thought maybe this would help. So when you think, gosh, I need some more zinc, you've got your go-to foods. And if you created your diet out of these foods, these are the most nutrient-dense foods of the nutrients most important for depression, well, you'd be getting all of the nutrients your brain needs for the minimum number of calories. And that just made good common sense to me. And when you think about things like iron, right? I don't think people think about clams, but clams are an amazing source of iron. Or liver, right? Everyone just goes, ugh. But that's like a horrible noise to make about a food. That liver was doing something. It's an organ, you know? And it's one of the most nutrient-dense cuts of meat that you have, right? But we don't even know how to make on liver anymore. People say like liver and onions, ugh. There's all kinds of great ways. Mom taught me that she chops up liver into little tiny cubes and puts it with the ground beef when she makes tacos for taco night. And she doesn't sneak it in. She tells the kids, like, there's liver in there, B vitamins. Turbocharge those beef tacos. The cashews right here. Love cashews. I was looking for high iron foods when we had our kids because there was a lot of breastfeeding, as I mentioned, and breast milk is amazing, but it doesn't have much iron in it. So really early on, we started feeding our kids cashews, both with this idea that introducing nuts earlier seems to be protective for kids, but also that they get a little bit more iron. Same thing with these pumpkin seeds, right? Packed with iron, packed with magnesium, but not one of those go-to foods for a lot of us. And so this idea sort of has taken hold for me of building human diets really out of these nutrient-dense brain foods. Dark chocolate, don't forget, dark chocolate's a great source of iron. You guys knew that, right? No, dark chocolate's your guilty pleasure. Everyone's like, oh yeah, then I had dark chocolate. Dark chocolate, I mean, what are trending right now? Fermented foods. Dark chocolate's a food, fermented food. Foods that are high in fiber. Dark chocolate's actually reasonably high in fiber. Foods that are high in magnesium. Dark chocolate. And foods that are high in iron. That little shift to being a joyful eater. Plant-based foods. Dark chocolate's a plant-based food. And so over time then, as I've gotten more involved with this information, it's been fascinating to watch what interests people. And we started doing these little sketches, and they just kind of blew up on social, and people were really curious on this kind of stuff, right? Of how do you think about zinc? What does it do, right? Zinc is just key to your immune system. Zinc also does this really, really cool thing that remember we were talking about brain-derived neurotrophic factor? So it's fascinating again to think about the end of your fork. You got your oyster, your pumpkin seed, or whatever your zinc choice is. And that zinc, that mineral, is going to travel through that fork into your gut, get absorbed into your bloodstream, into the brain, right, through the blood-brain barrier, through the cell membrane, through the nuclear membrane, and influence the expression of BDNF. Like, that is a really good reason to eat a pumpkin seed, I would say, right? That's how I convince my children. They're just like, shh, hush, Dad, I'm eating the pumpkin seed, okay? And then you line this up with data like this. You're just looking at all the studies of zinc levels in depression, a meta-analysis. If you're south of this line, you have lower levels of zinc if you're depressed. Again, the farm boy in me. Pretty simple. Less zinc, more depression. Solution, eat more zinc. Let's move on to the omega-3 fats. These get lots and lots of press, and they're different. Right? So 8% of the dry weight of your brain is DHA, 22 carbon long fat. And a lot of people, when we talk about like flaxseed and kale and those things, they don't have long-chain omega-3 fats. They have plant-based omega-3 fats, ALA. And you can convert some of this into EPA and DHA, but when you look at the outcome data, the best outcome data for mental health is of people who have high amounts of DHA in their brains. When you look at where you get these from fish, right? And I just wanted to compare these numbers to your fish oil pill, like wild salmon, 2,000 milligrams in 3 ounces. Like, turn over your fish oil pill, and you'll see that you get a couple hundred milligrams in a fish oil pill. And then think about, this is a fat-soluble thing, right? Meaning that you eat it today, and it's hanging out in your body for a while and getting incorporated into your cell membranes. DHA builds brain cells. DHA also, it's like a 007 molecule. Once it's in those brain cells, it has a bunch of breakdown products that can make these things called resolvins, which fight inflammation in your brain. It's just a really fascinating molecule, and it's a molecule that the majority of Americans just don't eat, right? It's so bad now that we have it in our milk. You see that, like that milk, like organic with DHA. I think it's 17 milligrams of DHA in that milk. Do we really want to be mixing algal oil with our milk as a solution to the fact that we don't eat seafood? I don't think so. I don't think that's a solution that works long term. This is what they do. This is, again, the highlight of the brain cell. So these omega-3 fats go into your brain cells. And when we talk about the receptors in your brain cells, there they are. Dopamine receptors, those make you real happy. Serotonin receptors, those make you pretty happy. So these cell membranes are a little more flexible, and they kind of work a little better and more efficiently when you have more DHA in them. And here's mentioned that you go all the way into the nuclear membrane with these omega-3 fats, and you increase BDNF. You improve the production of BDNF. One of the headwinds we face in our omega-3 fat consumption isn't just that we stopped eating omega-3 fats, it's that we've also started eating these omega-6 fats. The part of it is we switched over to this more grain-based agriculture system. We're eating lots and lots of linoleic acid. And the issue with this, theoretically, and now backed up by some data, is that omega-6s and omega-3s, they compete for these enzymes. And so what happens over time as you're eating a lot of omega-6 fats is you have a more kind of pro-inflammatory setup in your kind of fat inflammation response system. And so it's not just getting more omega-3s, it's also really focusing on where you're getting your omega-6s. And for most of those people, it's kind of clear. We started putting them in our food supply when we decided we should eat vegetable oils, because that's where you find most of them. We get a lot more of those omega-6s also in grain-based meats as opposed to grass-fed meats. And so again, as you think about these changes, right, it's sort of striking to think that without really a lot of information about what we were doing, we suddenly changed the fatty acid milieu that your brain lives in. And so it's not just the pharmacy that I have, not all my special medicines that, I'm pretty handy with, to be honest, and I think are a very important part of mental health for a lot of people. But I realize that there is this thing that's happened that we've put these two things at odds, right? Like somebody posted this nice thing on my Instagram saying something like the best doctors have the healthiest patients. And I had this little reaction. I was like, I don't think that's true. I think the best doctors have the sickest patients, because those are the physicians who are really sitting there in the front lines of mental health crises and health crises. Or that other great quote, right? The doctor of the future will give no medicines. It's like, damn, if you're a woman that needs Zoloft during pregnancy, that quote really doesn't help you, does it? I don't think so. So, there's the farm pharmacy. It's powerful, but I don't want everybody to think that in any way I'm arguing that it's in sort of opposition or in competition with the other pharmacy. I think when we have a food system and a healthcare system that works together, and we enter into the next sort of stage of mental health discussion, free of stigma, that we realize a lot of people have a path that they need to take for their mental health, and as communities, if we support that and all the options, we just do better. So let's talk about a couple of these food categories that I really want to make sure you leave here, because as I said, my intention was to feed you guys a lot of beer and pizza and then tell you how to feed your brain, because your brains are super important. So an oyster, how many calories are in an oyster? See, this is why counting calories really doesn't work for people, because we don't know. I gave a talk to a group of physicians, and a doctor, a very esteemed physician, got up. It was about, I'd say 90 calories per oyster. It's so there's 10 calories in an East Coast oyster. So this is 6 oysters, 60 calories. And I just put this up here to illustrate nutrient density. 60 calories, you get 500% of your daily need of zinc. Right? You get 245% of your B12, a third of your iron, and 565 milligrams of long-chain omega-3 fats, all for 60 calories. When you look at ancient, original American cookbooks, there are all these 100 oyster stews, and when you read Henry Hudson's sort of tales of coming into America in the Hudson Bay, it's like they talked about all of the seafood and the dinner platter-sized oysters. It's like an amazing food that has just gotten forgotten. And not just the oysters, but remember the bivalves, mussels, clams, and oysters. And this is Rocket Pie from Eat Complete, because I was friends with lots of plant-forward, plant-based people and some vegans, and they have these arguments and I listen to everybody, I don't want to eat anything that has a mother. And I'd be like, does a clam have a mother? Really? I was just thinking, it does. And they're like, well, what else? I don't want to eat anything with a face. And I was like, I don't think a clam has a face exactly. I don't know. And usually vegans like pizza. And I was like, would you try a super special clam pizza? And so this is a pizza with sort of an arugula garlic schmear base. And it's just chopped up clams on there with little microgreens. And again, just a way to mix up your pizza game. That is nutrient-dense pizza. And when we talk about seafood, it's sort of hard to talk about seafood these days without people either asking you about mercury or increasingly asking you about microplastic. And I don't answer questions about microplastic because it just gets me upset and I start to cry. But I will answer some questions about mercury. And the bottom line is if you avoid old big fish and you eat small fish like anchovies and mussels, things that have a short half-life, you get much lower, you don't get a lot of mercury. Where the mercury in the bad mercury stores come from is big old tuna, usually small brains like children eating it every day. And what you want to go after are these high omega-3 fat fish, because again, this is the only place that you find it. You don't find these anywhere else in the food supply. People say fish is expensive. This is $10 for a pound of wild salmon. This is in Manhattan. So I guess it's expensive. $10 is a lot, but when I look at what people spend their money on in food, not to judge, but I don't see a lot of this. I think that's very affordable. That's at least one really good, delicious dinner for a family of 4. Another food category you saw up there were leafy greens. Why are leafy greens so important? Why are these cruciferous vegetables so important? Again, it gets down to nutrient density. And kale, all my kale shenanigans and National Kale Day kind of taught me this rule of brain food. And if you think about what does kale give us? Kale gives us nutrient density, right? More calories, more nutrients per calorie in kale than pretty much anything else. It gives us culinary versatility. Just do you come to my house for kale? You got kale chips, kale soup. I have kale pesto. I'll make you a kale hito. It's you can do a lot with kale, right? And it sits there in your fridge forever. It's great. And then local availability. You just buy kale anywhere. Organic bunch of kale is $2, $3, right? It's really, really delicious, filling, staple food. People talk a lot about rainbows and eating the rainbows, and again, that's another great way to judge the brain healthiness of your plate, is you just look at that plate and are there colors in it? And if there are colors on it, what those represent are the different flavonoids, flavanols, and carotenoids, these phytonutrients. Again, things you only find in plants. And it's, again, just a simple way to think about how stuff from the end of your fork gets all the way into your brain. Things like lycopene. Lycopene is a powerful antioxidant. Look at lycopene data, it lines up pretty clearly. People with more lycopene in their diet have less dementia. What does lycopene do in a brain cell? Sits there in that fatty acid membrane and is an antioxidant. Really important because that big long chain fat, DHA, it's really, really easy to oxidize. That's why you shouldn't get your fish oil and be like, when you drink your fish oil, which is how I recommend people take it, don't try because you're oxidizing it, and that's what creates that fishy smell. Things that are in plants are really just these very, very, I call them miracle molecules. It's just sort of fascinating that they line up with our DNA and sort of stimulate all kinds of things to happen, generally good things. And that's why in Eat Complete, I tried to give a variety of colors of smoothies, right? Just because I was sort of stuck on the blueberry smoothie, and that's all I was getting. And it's you need a whole variety of colors in your smoothie game. And then, do you know about this? Sorry, I lined up my joke. Sorry, I forgot about that. There's only one problem if you eat too many colorful vegetables. You guys know about this? It happened to me once. It was very scary. I was eating a lot of colorful vegetables. Then you feel the tingle in your finger, rainbow finger. You guys know about that? Very, very frightening. So just for the doctors in the room, just warn people. You shoot it out. It makes people happy, but it's scary at first, like any superpower. And then fermented foods. Trying to go back to this original theme of traditional food, foods we grow on farm. What was the first way that we stored food? Right? By fermenting it. I mean, that was like the miracle of dairy, is that you could transport calories. Before that, you're just I've got some old soybeans that you can take with you on your journey and some dried meat. Fermentation pre-digests food for us. It creates a new set of molecules, and then most importantly, it gives you bacteria to eat. And we've co-evolved with these bacteria in your gut. Now, you're looking at me, you're like, Drew Ramsey, wow, nice to hear, there you go. How many genes am I? I'm just 27,000 genes. I was really disappointed to learn that. I thought I was more genes. When the genome, they mapped the human genome, they figured out we are just made of 27,000 active genes. In my gut, there are probably about 2 million different genes. So I'm sort of actually a thin veneer of Drew Ramsey on top of a solid core of bacteria, just to be clear. And we're increasingly learning that the bacteria in our gut have so much to do with our health. They have so much to do with how we process energy, whether we get obese, and even whether we get depressed. We know that there are certain foods, prebiotic foods, that have certain fibers that tend to support healthier bacteria that look like they help us have a healthier immune system. It's just connection between our brain health and our gut health and our immune system, because the majority of your immune system lives in your gut. And there's that basic thing, right? You can't have a healthy brain without a healthy gut, because you need a healthy gut to absorb all those nutrients. So I call them the good bugs. It's not just these minerals and vitamins and omega-3 fats that we need for our brain. It's also this good, healthy bacteria that you can get from fermented foods like kombucha, kimchi, sauerkraut. And there's now increasingly a few trials, right? There's a meta-analysis of probiotics to alleviate depression, which sort of tells us we don't know which strands to give you, but there's definitely big differences between people who have depression and people who don't in terms of their microbiome. There's a fascinating trial of people with active mania and bipolar disorder, hospitalized at Johns Hopkins. Acute mania, given treatment as usual, usually lithium or Depakote, and they added on placebo versus probiotic. 6 months later, what they found is that individuals who got the probiotic, they were hospitalized, for those who had a high inflammatory index, 90% less. And when they were rehospitalized, it was for 2.5 days versus 7 days. Something's going on there in terms of this connection between inflammation and our gut and psychiatric symptoms that you're going to hear more and more about this over the next few years. But again, it leads to those simple farm boy rules. Until all the data comes in, how do you feed your microbiome? Eat fermented foods and eat more plants. And I just want to go over a couple other food categories quickly. Nuts and seeds are just a great food category because they're transportable, they're great snacks, and they're a really nice mix of fats, protein, and slow-burning carbs. It's also just got great minerality in there. And remember that statistic of what we weren't getting? So now 96% of Americans don't get enough vitamin E every day. And so a handful of almonds is a great way to start chipping away at that problem. Almonds, walnuts, cashews, pecans, just to really, again, when I work with patients, one of the first things you start working on is trying to get healthier snacks involved. And then nuts are the only thing that have really been shown to correlate with BDNF. This was a study of the Mediterranean diet. I love these. I'm moving to Spain. I love these studies. They give you olive oil and they give you nuts. And what this study showed is for individuals who got the nuts plus the Mediterranean diet, they were protected. They had about a 78% lower risk of having very low levels of BDNF. Now, BDNF is not like a perfect biomarker for depression, but it's like, I don't know, something that makes my brain cells grow. I think I kind of want more of that. So it's fascinating to see that nuts have this sort of special effect. Nuts are actually one of the only foods that's really been shown to increase longevity in studies as well. And then I just quickly want to talk about meat and eggs. We're sort of running out of time, but the reason I want to talk about meat is people just make bad meat choices, right? They either eat no meat at all, because meat's horrible, and it's like, I don't know, talk to a farmer. It was actually great talking at Loma Farms yesterday of this idea of you can really pull all the nitrogen you need using cover crops into the soil. But most farmers use manure. And where does that manure come from? Usually it comes from animals on farms. And if you think from farm efficiency and those really like nice small farms, there's often this really great cycle where they have some animals and sort of a way of increasing the fertility of their soil. So I like to talk about meat just we eat so much of it. 270 pounds per person per year in America. Just a lot of meat because meat is so intensive to make, and oftentimes that argument becomes like we should or shouldn't eat it as opposed to how can we do this in a way that's really healthy for our health and for our farms. After all, cows eat grass, right? This seems kind of simple, but this is what we've created. Not simple, not good quality meat, not good for the planet, not good for the environment. And I think with our food dollars, you can really shift that, right? That's why grass-fed meat is a thing now, is people are buying it and focusing on it. This is just looking at what the difference is. This is an experiment I encourage people to do at home when they're asking me what's the difference, because I try to teach people, like, good luck sorting that out for yourself. Go try it. And what you happen is you eat that corn-fed steak and it's like, yum, yum, steak, delicious. You just don't really have to chew it at all. It doesn't have like a meaty flavor. And grass-fed beef has about a third fewer calories. There's a shift in fatty acid profile. And it's just a different product. And then eggs are just very controversial now with it's one of those sort of flashpoints people focus on. But I like to point out, nutrient density, 70 calories in an egg. It's one of the only foods that has vitamin B9 and vitamin B12. It's one of the only foods that has a high concentration of choline, right, which is a B vitamin like folate. And it's a very affordable food, right? And again, what is it? It's a great vehicle for lots of vegetables, like nothing better than a veggie frittata. And then as we move away from meat-based diets to more plant-based diets, sources of protein like beans and legumes become quite important, and especially in things like lentils, like again, these sleeper foods, right? A couple lentils has 90% of your daily need of folate, vitamin B9. Right? Just one of those real powerhouses that I want on your list as you think about nutrient-dense foods. This was the French onion soup in Eat Complete because I like French people and I like onions and I like soup. So I was like, I got to put that in the cookbook. But the problem is French onion soup doesn't really have any nutrients in it. And so we put a can of small white beans in there and suddenly it became one of the more nutrient-dense recipes in the book. So there's those little switches and swaps that you can do in your own house and in your own kitchen. So I asked you at the beginning, can you eat to build a better brain? I've tried to present some data around the idea of stop thinking so much about serotonin in your brain health and start thinking about BDNF and brain growth. Start thinking about the things every day in your life that affect your dietary pattern and how you can eat a dietary pattern that has more nutrient density of these specific nutrients that are so important for your brain. Namely, we talked about omega-3 fats, zinc, vitamin B12. Focusing on colors, focusing on increasing the fat quality in your diet, and having fun with your food, I think is just a key mental health intervention for all of us. I know that's when I feel my best and most content, when I'm at like a little dinner party that I've made some nice stuff and I've had a glass of wine and I'm with my community. I feel connected and it's just a lovely feeling. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Don't be scared of fish. Remember the little clams. Like nobody told you a clam was a superfood, but it is, okay? Nobody's speaking up for the little clammies, but I'm going to. And focusing on a whole food, a traditional, a Mediterranean dietary pattern, however you're going to see it, those seem to have a real clear signal, not just in terms of our physical health, but in terms of our mental health. And if we learn from history and we put the genie back in the bottle and we, I think, just follow in the footsteps of what you all are doing, I think we build a food supply and a food system that supports our mental health. So I want to thank you all. I'm easy to get a hold of. We're going to be doing the first ever nutritional psychiatry training in the United States next weekend, so it's really fun to be here with you all kind of prepping for that a little bit. My books are easy to find, and Brilliant Books has done a nice job having them all here. And I'm looking forward to answering your questions and spending the next couple of days with you. And I guess just in ending, I'm a psychiatrist, so it's sort of weird. I usually get 45 minutes and I just have one of you. And but it's my hope as a psychiatrist, right, that I'm going to find, you and I are together going to find that like specific thing that you need from me, that you need from this treatment. And so I can't know that about you, but I really hope that something today sticks with you and you carry with you as you think about your mental health and you think about your food. That would be such an honor to help you keep your brain running well as you guys continue the very beautiful and very good work you're doing in this community. So thank you so much, and see you down the road.